Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of PON Live from the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. It is noon here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, our traditional starting time for these events. My name is Nicole Bryant. I am the Managing Director of the Program on Negotiation, and it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you today to this edition of PON Live on impression mismanagement. As many of you know, because we have so many regular participants in these events, for 40 years now, the Program on Negotiation has led the world in research and curriculum development and executive education trainings related to the fields, not only of negotiation, but also mediation and conflict resolution. And we are ever so pleased to present this series of live events open to the public on various topics related to negotiation and also not just negotiation, because we recognize that there are lots of opportunities to learn and collaborate in our community. As ever, I'd like to thank, before we get started, the incredible PON staff who does so much work putting on the series of events that we have across the semester. Our Assistant Director, James Kerwin, Diane Long, our events coordinator, and Lindsay Sullivan, our program assistant. So a big thanks to them. And a big thanks to all of you tuning in the chat. As always, I love to see where you're coming in from. So many places that we have been, would like to be at. And it's great to see such an active group already in the first couple of minutes. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, I'll just remind you a little bit about the format of today's event. We have an hour to be together, and we will begin by a presentation from our speaker. And for the last 20 minutes or so, we will proceed to a question and answer session. So, of course, at any time during our discussion, if you have a comment, please feel free to write it in the chat. But if you've got a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of our screen. That allows us to more clearly streamline all of those questions that we will be getting. And now I'm very delighted to introduce Övül Sezer, who is our distinguished guest for today. She is an assistant professor of management and organizations at Cornell University, and her research and teaching focuses on negotiations, but also impressions. And finally, she has a second life, or perhaps a related life, which I know she's going to talk about a little bit, as a stand-up comedian. And I was remarking before we began today that I feel like the Venn diagram of academics and stand-up comedians is pretty small, but I can't wait to watch the comedy special that ensues, because I think there is a lot of comedy in academia and research. So I'm very delighted to learn from and with Övül today. And thank her very much for taking the time to be with us. And with that, I will cede the Zoom floor for the next couple of minutes or so, and then return, of course, to moderate our discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. Thanks a lot for the kind introduction, and thanks so much for joining us, everybody. What a delight to see. Hello from everywhere in the world. So hello to you from Ithaca, United States. And I would like to share my screen first, and then we'll talk about very exciting things that I think about every single day. This impression management, how we manage the impressions that we make on others, is a question that I've been thinking about every single day since I got my PhD, even during my doctoral work. So let's share the screen first. And then I think, I hope you're all seeing my slides and me. I think we're all good since I'm not hearing any warning. Thank you so much once again for joining us. So today I'm going to be talking about impression mismanagement, which I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But first, I'd like to just talk about how the impressions that we make on others influence many of the long-term outcomes that we get, and many of the important outcomes that we get. For example, whether we get hired or not during a job interview depends on the impressions that we make. Or imagine you're at a networking event where you are really looking forward to making some connections that will be helpful to you in the future, but at the same time, you are not sure whom to contact and what to do in that setting. And this is another setting where impressions that we make definitely influence the outcomes that we get in the long run. Or imagine, whether you get promoted or not, whether your supervisor supervisor evaluates you favorably or not. Depends on the impressions that you make. Similarly, maybe you have a startup idea, maybe you have an entrepreneurial pitch and you need to convince investors for some funds to give you to pursue this idea. And in a setting like this, when you're presenting to investors, when you're presenting to clients, even when I'm giving this presentation right now, we just met right now, and we are having a lot of impressions about each other. Or any type of organizational meeting where you have to be around the round table, make some important decisions, and you have, whether you say the right thing or sometimes maybe you fail to say the right thing, that can make or break the impressions that you make on others. And of course, because I know that, this program is about program on negotiations, and I've been also a scholar who has been teaching negotiations both at Cornell and in my previous institutions. In negotiations, the impressions that we make also influence a lot of the important outcomes. But the case that I'm going to make today is that sometimes very important people who are supposed to know what they should be saying, say things that actually invite a lot of criticism. So I'll show you some examples of these multiple behaviors that I've been studying over the years. For instance, here is Jimmy Iovine. He's an executive at Apple, and he received some criticism because when he was trying to promote this new product, Apple Music streaming system, he said that we created this because women don't know how to find music. This Apple service will help women to do that music thing. That's exactly his words, because not everyone knows a DJ. So this behavior, the society calls this behavior mansplaining. So, I have, this is one of my favorites. I mean, not the behavior itself. I mean, I don't like the behavior itself, but one of my favorite research papers that I'm working on right now, people call it mansplaining, and we're investigating what is it exactly. And it's actually not a gender-based behavior, so we conceptualize it as downsplaining. It's a very status-based behavior where people in high status positions do this interesting, condescending advice giving that people call mansplaining. So here you see an executive who actually failed to promote a new product that they are good at. Or imagine like after this talk, or maybe even right now, one of you tells me you're funny. That would make me happy, because as Nicole said, one of my passions in this life, in addition to research and teaching, is doing stand-up comedy. If you're ever in New York City, I perform Fridays, once or twice a month, depending on whether I'm teaching that semester or not. So imagine you tell me you're funny, I would be very happy. Or imagine after this talk, you'll tell me this was a great talk. I would love that. Not that I'm inviting those comments, but these are examples of compliments that we like to hear. And if we hear something like this, life is good because I like the person who's giving me this comment. I feel good about myself. You feel good about yourself. Everything is great. But imagine, I know you wouldn't say something like this, but imagine someone else adds just a few more words to this comment. And instead of saying you're funny, they tell me you're funny for a woman, or this talk was great for a young woman, something like that. Now the whole dynamic of this interaction has changed, right? Like now we don't even know how to respond to this comment. Should I say thank you? That's kind of a weird thing to say. It's very awkward to hear this. Because when we hear a compliment, we don't necessarily think about whether being compared to something or not. Life is good. I feel good about myself and I like you, and everything feels great. At the same time, when we hear a backhanded compliment, the example that I just showed you, you're funny for a woman, or this was a great talk for a young woman, or something like that, we understand that this communicator is comparing us to a negative standard, because they only think that we are good compared to this group. And it looks like, from what they're saying, it looks like they're implying, in fact, their stereotypes is actually stereotypical thinking is leaking through their words, is that they're comparing us to this group because they do not think very highly of this group in terms of being funny. So at the overall distribution of funniness, or whatever skill we're talking about, hearing a backhanded compliment puts me at the lower end of the distribution. And we can come up with lots of different backhand compliments. If someone tells me your English is great for an international, I'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm at least upper intermediate. I've been living in this country for 18 years now. And statements like this, we also hear all over the news. When President Obama was elected to be the president of the United States, there were all these articles in the news, even during the election period. Oh, he's so articulate, he's so eloquent. And of course he would be, because he was a very talented politician who has been in Senate for years. Hearing these comments again is an example of this behavior, and we see that we not only we experience them in our professional or personal lives, but we also see these types of comments in public discourse and conversation. Here is another event. You would remember we all witnessed this event when Jeff Bezos and a group went to space in a commercial flight. So this was a very historical moment to witness. And of all the things that they could say after going to space and coming back, Jeff Bezos said, oh, I want to thank every Amazon employee and customer because you guys paid for all of this, which of course prompted criticism because again, it had this sort of tone-deaf approach and condescending tone to it. So even thank yous sometimes can go wrong. Even thank yous are not necessarily always nice. So this is what I mean by impression mismanagement. So when things between a group of people or two people or a leader and the followers go wrong, and things go wrong between people, I absolutely love that moment. Not in life, that's not what I mean. Like, I don't like to experience these awkward moments. But as a researcher, I get fascinated by when things we say or we do not say are not when others don't hear. That's a fascinating concept to me. Another more example of these types of behaviors. Here's a tweet from social media, public tweet, and it's in the academic domain. So I love this. Just been asked to give a talk at Oxford. I'm more surprised than you are. So here we see that this person is doing multiple things at the same time. They're talking about how they want to give, how they're giving this talk at this great high status institution, Oxford University, but they're also very surprised. We see the false humility there. There's, oh my God, they can't believe it. So this is an example of what we call humble bragging. This is one of my first loves first love actually in this topic. This was my doctoral dissertation. So as we say, people try to do multiple things here. They want to talk about something that they've done great, and very successful, some accomplishment, but they also combine it with attempts at humility. And it's not necessarily, it's seemingly the right strategy to self-presenters. When we did this research, we found that people actually do combine because they want to get the best of both worlds. So if I create the space for you about self-presentation and social perception, we have these two interpersonal universal goals that are that coexist in every relationship that we can think of, because when we meet someone, we care about the universal dimensions of social perception, which is warmth and competence. So we would like to see whether the person is actually warm and nice, which is related to this goal of liking, and we want to see whether they are actually competent, intelligent, capable, which is related to the goal of getting respect, being respected. And we know from research that the strategies that get at both are kind of orthogonal to each other. So we can ingratiate towards others. We can be very other-oriented. We can give compliments. We can engage in flattery. We can smile a lot. We can conform. We can get gifts. We can try to be humble, which would definitely ensure that we are going to be liked. But at the same time, in terms of signaling our competence, there is this risk that we're facing, because these ingratiation strategies may also mean that we are not equipped to deal with the complexities of a task. At the same time, when we engage in self-promotion, it's true that people would know about our competence and our intelligence and capabilities, yet people may perceive it as, this person is being such a braggart and arrogant. Therefore, with a strategy like humble bragging, people would hope to be here because it's the best of both worlds. But what we found in our research is that this actually backfires because it's so so fake and it's very insincere. So humble bragging is even worse than straightforward bragging. You know, just saying something like, I'm great, I'm smart, I'm beautiful is way more effective than saying something like, I'm so surprised that people invited me for a talk at Oxford. And this is my research program. So I focus on these different domains, such as self-promotion, feedback and advice, networking, and I focus on the downstream consequences of these behaviors. So in terms of self-promotion, you see that I talked about humble bragging a little bit. People sometimes brag by including gratitude expressions in their self-promotions attempt. I don't want to say the word here because I don't know if there's like a polite way to say this word, but when people witness this behavior in their organizations, we found that in a recent paper, it's just published this year, we found that not only it leads to bad impressions, but it also kills the motivation. So if you see your leader, oops, something happened. I hope you see my screen again. If you see your leader falling for ass kissing, again, excuse my language, not only you think that they're being very naive, but you also feel less motivated and less committed to do your work because something dies in your heart. In the feedback and advice domain, I already talked a little bit about backhand compliments, but we also have other projects that focus more on the intrapsychic effects of impression management, because these behaviors, you can also, I hope, relate to this, that when we engage in these behaviors, not only we are managing the impressions that we make, but they also make us feel a certain way. When we, for instance, when we have this new paper right now about I told you so effect, and when we ask people whether, have you ever heard this statement in your life or have you ever said this to someone else, people do confess that sometimes they do say, I told you so. And they do not necessarily think that it's going to lead to a good impression. So it's not a mistake like the other ones that I showed you. But when we ask them, why do you say this? They say, well, it feels so good to be right. So this tremendous power of being right sometimes can make us make these mistakes. In terms of networking, people also have this interesting behavior that they do name dropping. They would casually drop the name of a high status institution or high status name. You know, they would mention, oh, you know, at Princeton, we would get bagels in the morning. Or Zuck doesn't want me to leave, so I'm trying to find another tech space, but things like that. You know, people casually drop the name into a conversation, and we also look at the downstream consequences in an organization, whether it's a norm, whether it creates a culture. If we see certain types of behaviors, for instance, I got my PhD at Harvard, not to name drop. Welcome to my world, by the way. Now it's all paranoia, and sometimes I do catch myself engaging these behaviors, and I do guarantee that you will be more self-aware after hearing this talk, or maybe you will also observe other behaviors a little more, and you will see lots of humble brags or name drops and things like that. And I do remember that one of the concerns that I had with my when I was defending my dissertation was, you know, is this behavior just the Harvard, or does it happen everywhere? So I'm very interested whether the norms of self-presentation do influence their frequency and prevalence. Okay, so this is my overall research, and I'm gonna, you know, I wanted to introduce all of this in case you may have questions at the end about all of these behaviors, from you know, mansplaining to gratitude bragging to ass kissing to name dropping. And I'm very happy to answer all of them. But to show you some of the experiments that we have and studies that we have, and to show you how we are approaching these behaviors and how we study them, I would like to focus on hiding success, because it looks like so far I introduced you to the humble bragging piece. I talked about this warmth and competence trade-off, like how getting liking and getting respect at the same time, being liked and being respected at the same time is not an easy endeavor, because it's so hard to get to both, and it's very also hard to signal our humility. So I've been very interested in this question of how do we signal whether we are being humble or not? Is there a way to signal that? If you think about it, you know, humility has all these positive consequences for your team, like psychological safety. It leads to higher liking. It leads to better culture. It's something that has all positive consequences. Yet signaling humility is very hard. And whenever I presented my humble bragging work previously, I would usually get the question, what if you don't say anything? What if you actually do not talk about your successes? Maybe you don't even post anything on your social media. You don't say anything, and that may seem like a smart strategy. So I wanted to analyze that, because the moment you say, it's not a verbal strategy, right? You cannot signal your humility verbally. The moment you say, I'm humble, it's over. Then you're not humble. You know, I'm the most humble person you'll ever meet. No, that just doesn't work. So what happens when we hide success? Again, think about a moment when you felt very accomplished. Maybe you achieved something. Maybe you graduated. Maybe you got a new job, new position, you got promotion, or you got an award. On one hand, it's maybe a good idea to say that because it feels amazing, you feel good. And also in this attention economy where everyone is competing for our attention and everyone is claiming some expertise domain, it may be a good idea to talk about our competence and our accomplishments, because otherwise people would never know and we would never get the opportunities. At the same time, there's this concern that we may come across as a braggart. So these are the common impression management considerations that the previous literature has also talked about. I also mentioned this previously, just a few slides ago when I talked about humble bragging. This is known as the self-promotion paradox. Again, this trade-off. How do we self-promote? That's why most of the time when I ask this to my students, or the people from various backgrounds when I teach executive education programs, people do feel a little weird about bragging. You know, how do we self-promote is never a question that we learn somewhere. We don't know what's the best way to do that, and we are aware of this trade-off. So this is the impression management consideration. So some of you may think, okay, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to say anything so that I don't come across as a braggart, especially now that everyone is posting on their social media, everyone is talking about how great they are. Yet we know from research that there may be some costs of hiding. So if you have some information that you're not sharing, there could already be some costs that we know from prior work, and I'm going to summarize that for you. When we know that when communicators hide information, targets tend to assume that the hidden information is more negative than it really is. So the fantastic research here's the idea. So imagine you're on a date, and imagine you ask the person, have you ever cheated on your partners before? And if the other person says, oh, I don't want to answer this question, we immediately assume they have cheated on their partner before, right? We somehow assume that there's something to hide. And if the expected information is not included, it can cause people to feel anxious and uncertain. It's also costly for the person who is hiding. So because hiding information and not sharing something requires emotion suppression, which is very stressful. In fact, some recent research even shows that when we hide information about ourselves, it's definitely stressful and anxious, anxiety inducing, but the process of keeping a secret, even if we hide information about somebody else, that's also psychologically very burdensome for the communicator. So there's some evidence from the prior research and literature that can tell us, well, you may want to not talk about your accomplishments, but it also comes with some emotional costs. Here we wanted to focus on something else. So far, again, I talked about this warmth and competence trade-off and the impression management consideration, but what about relational considerations? Because when we choose to share something with someone versus when we choose not to share something with someone, we are not only giving information about ourselves, but we also give information about our relationship, right? That means whether we're seeing we're seeing the other party as somebody close or not. So if I share, that can mean, oh, we are close enough to sharing each other's success. If we do not share, that also means, oh, maybe we are not that close. So I'm giving that signal as well. So imagine your friend recently got promoted and you receive these news about your friend's promotion. If they share their success, you'll just say, that's great. I love that. Congrats. If they do not share, though, if they hide, then the question of, you would start wondering why they didn't share that with you. you start ruminating, because in close relationships and friendships, not sharing is a violation of an expected norm. And when we see behavior that's not fitting with the norms that we think of in our minds, we start ruminating and we start questioning why. Why is this happening? And one way of interpreting this behavior is, oh, maybe they think I'll be threatened by their success. Maybe they think I'll be jealous. Maybe they think I won't be happy for them. And they're trying to regulate my threat. And that was where we were thinking, oh, that can be actually quite an offensive thing. So even though the communicator may have all the good intentions to protect their friend from envy or feeling upset or things like that, it may come from all these good intentions. The target of this behavior may actually interpret this as quite condescending and insulting. So what we hypothesized for this paper was, when communicators hide their success, targets feel less close and more insulted than when communicators share their success. And when I say hide their success, I mean intentionally withholding positive information about yourself or your accomplishments. And we say that hiding success leads targets to infer that communicators have paternalistic motives. And paternalistic motives is, what we mean by that is this intention to help the target based on assumption about the target's best interest. So you, as the communicator, are trying to protect their feelings, trying to make them feel good and not feel bad. Paternalistic motives has also, that has been studied in the work of prosocial lies. For instance, when, let's say, someone doesn't have a great outfit and they ask you, how do I look? If you are someone who tells them, oh, you look pretty great, that would be a prosocial lie, because you wouldn't want them to feel bad about themselves. That's an idea of paternalistic lie, paternalistic motive that you may have there. So I'm going to show you some studies, and then I'm going to also talk about the other papers, and I'll try to give some overall practical suggestions to all of us about impression management. So first, to understand whether this phenomenon happens in real life, we actually went out to real world and we asked about 100 participants in downtown Chapel Hill, which I used to live there for a while, and Grant Park in Chicago. My colleagues used to live there, and we asked them, have you ever done this behavior? Do you hide your success from others in everyday life? Have you ever engaged in this behavior? If so, who was this person? And also, if you said yes, why did you do that? Why did you hide your success from someone else? And we see that a lot of people, you see that majority of people, 82% of people, did say, yes, I've done this behavior before. I did intentionally withhold positive information and news about my success from others. And when we asked who, you see that a lot of them are from coworkers, which is already interesting to me, because with our coworkers, we do have this friendly relationship, but there's also the competition at the workplace. From close, followed by close friend, family member, acquaintance. And when we asked them, why do you do this behavior? And we gave them different motivations to rate. We asked them, do you hide your success because you didn't want to make it awkward? Do you hide your success because you didn't want to look like you're bragging? And among all these different motivation questions, these two were highest rated, significantly higher than the other ones. Majority of people hide their success because they think it would make the target envious or make them feel bad, and they wanted to avoid that. So it was really the case that they were trying to regulate the other person's emotional response. And here are some examples of how hiding success occurs in real life. My friend got a lower grade than me on an exam. I didn't want to upset her and like that I got the same degree grade as her. I've always excelled at academics, but the rest of my family and friends have struggled. I quietly received honors throughout my school years. For those of us who have been good at academics, I think we can relate to this. My pregnancy because close friends couldn't get pregnant, or I was interacting with a college student from lower ranked college who asked me about my graduation degree. I omitted my college name so as not to seem arrogant. Again, especially some graduates of some schools do this a lot. I go to school in Boston. I went to school in Palo Alto or New Haven. Schools like Yale, Stanford, Harvard. Sometimes graduates wouldn't mention the name of the school, but would say the city of the school in a very interesting way. Or my best friend has less money than me and I don't tell her about some of my trips and purchases. So in these examples, you see that from milestones, from life's milestones to graduations, like from very young age to different stages of life, people have this intuition, which is again this very interesting phenomenon. You know, where do these intuitions come from? Because in my next studies, I'm going to show you how these intuitions are actually mistaken and misguided, because it backfires. For our next study, we went to an academic conference, so we wanted to have a workplace context with actual practitioners, and we collected data from 114 academics at an academic conference in a networking reception event like this. And we asked them, okay, imagine your friend Alex is giving a job talk, which means they're invited for a job interview by a school. And imagine you learn this from a university website. So university website already has their seminar schedule out. So you see that your friend is going to give a talk there. So you see that your friend is having this job interview. So you already know this information, and we asked our participants to imagine either Alex share this news with you, or they tell you that there's nothing new with the job market. They do not talk about their incoming job talk or job interview. And then we asked them, how close do you feel to your friend? We asked them about whether they feel, to what extent they feel offended or insulted. We asked about paternalistic motives, and I'm going to show that scale to you just to give you an idea of what we mean by that exactly. We also asked, to what extent do you trust this friend, and to what extent would you like to collaborate with this friend? And here's our paternalistic motive scales. As you can see, this is all about whether you want to prevent whether you thought your friend was trying to prevent you from being envious, or they think you would be threatened. This is our scale. And what we find is that when the communicators hide their success compared to sharing their success, you see that the targets feel more insulted by it. So when the success is hidden, as the recipient of that behavior, you feel more insulted, and you infer that the communicator who hides their success had higher paternalistic motives for you. So the intent of that behavior seem more paternalistic to you than when they share. And we find similar patterns with effective trust and collaboration, meaning that when communicators hide their success, targets trust them less, and than when they share their success. And similarly, they want to collaborate with the hiding person to a lesser extent than the person who shares their success. And there's something interesting about hiding success, though. So when someone hides other information, do we still think that? Do we still infer that this is about us and they're trying to protect us? Or is there something specific about hiding success? So with that, I want to take you to a lab environment, because I'm an experimentalist. I love experiments, and I want to go through this experiment with all of you. So here our participants were 288 participants in our lab, in our university, and they engaged in this information exchange paradigm. So basically we asked the participants to fill out a survey, and they indicate their GPA. And then we tell them, okay, right now you are paired with a partner in this lab. Right now you have a partner in this lab. And we told them that, okay, your partner will answer the survey twice. And they will know that in case one, in the time one, we'll tell them these answers will be shared with your partner, and the other one will tell them they will not be shared with your partner. The reason why we did this is because this was our way of our clever design of getting away, how we can signal that their partner was really hiding the information. So this is what they saw, the examples of hiding and sharing success. So the partner entered their age, entered their gender, and in the condition when we told them, okay, this survey will be shared with your partner, they enter, oh, I don't remember my GPA. But in the condition where they knew, in the time that they knew that, oh, it's going to be shared with their partner, they entered their GPA, just to make sure we showed these two to our participants, just to make sure that when they see this version, they do not necessarily think, oh, maybe they really didn't remember their GPA. Although, I mean, based on my experience with teaching, I think it's very unlikely that undergraduate students would not know their GPA nowadays, here in the US at least. So here we wanted to make that hiding is very intentional. So they know their GPA, but they don't want to share it. So they say, I don't remember. Again, when a success was hidden, the communicator who hides their success was perceived way more insulting and offensive than the communicator who shared their success. But we did not see the same pattern with failure. So when someone hides their failure, we do not feel any offense or insult by that. In fact, when we look at paternalistic motives, we again see that the communicator who hides their success, they signal higher paternalistic motives than the person who shares their success. We do not see the same pattern with failure. Again, when someone does not talk about their failure, we don't necessarily think that they're trying to regulate our emotions or it's about us. We do not engage in this type of thinking. Now in our final experiment, and I'll say more about other papers, hopefully I'll have time. We also wanted to understand when it can be more or less offensive. And this time we had our undergraduates and MBA students during recruiting season. So many of you may be familiar that every semester there's this recruiting season where big companies are trying to recruit for summer internships, which is one way that our students can secure a permanent job offer from these organizations. So internship offers during MBA or undergraduate years are quite important here. And this time participants were randomly assigned to one of the 4 conditions. So we asked them to imagine that they're talking to their friend from the MBA program, Sam, and imagine you ask them directly, hey, have you ever heard anything from the internships you applied to? Or some of them imagined they just ask indirectly, hey, anything new in your life? And they either saw that Sam shares this success and tells you that he received an offer from McKinsey, or Sam replies, nope, nothing, and then he says he has to run, which is sort of more realistic way of how these conversations play out in real life. And again, we replicate our previous findings that when communicators hide their success, targets feel more insulted than when communicators share their success. When is a response to the direct question, of course, but when it's an indirect response, when it's a response to an indirect question, we still see the same effect, meaning that hiding is harmful again, because it does make people feel more insulted than sharing, but the effect is a little attenuated because people probably give a little bit benefit of the doubt that it wasn't a direct question. So we ran so many different studies for this, and I'm going to show you an overall consequence chart. So we find again and again that when communicators hide their success as opposed to sharing their success, recipients do infer higher paternalistic motives. That's why they do not like this behavior. When we looked at envy, as you remember, the main intention behind this behavior was, well, I'm going to hide my success so that no one feels envious. We do not find the evidence that it is true that hiding or sharing success leads to higher levels of envy, but hiding success doesn't prevent people from feeling envious. In terms of warmth and competence, again, sharing success almost always, in all of our studies that are published in the paper, which you'll have access to after this talk, higher warmth and competence if you share your success compared to hide your success. In terms of modesty and humility, hiding success sometimes has benefits, but it has to be a very specific context. Again, if you do not reply to a direct question, and if you then hiding success is worse, but only like indirectly. If someone asks a question and if you do not talk about it, people do give you a little bit benefit of the doubt and may perceive you as more modest. We also looked at relationship closeness in our other studies, and here we brought people to the lab who already knew each other. So these are participants who already knew each other. So 48 of them were friends, 17 were work colleagues, 14 were romantic partners. I want to highlight nothing happened to our spouses, no divorce happened after these studies. And we found that the more closer you are to your partner, the closer this relationship is, the more offensive hiding success is. when we again make them engage in this information exchange paradigm, and one side thought that the other person was hiding their success, the closer this relationship, the more offensive this act was. We also had a study with medical students following the match day. Again, this is a big day for medical students, where students in the US get matched to their residency programs. So they all wait for this day in a very eager, anxious, excited way. And we asked them whether, how would they feel if their best friend got into their dream job versus a distant friend got into their dream job. And let's say they hide versus share their success. And again, closer the relationship, the more offensive this behavior is. We also ran a study with high school seniors who applied to colleges that year, and they were expecting to hear from colleges about whether they got into the university or not. And in this sample, they were, we asked them again to, how would you respond if your best friend hide their success versus distant friend? Here, we did not find any difference because they were angry at both. I don't know if it's something specific about this sample that teenagers are just angry at everybody, but I can say that there is some evidence that the more closer your relationship is, the more harmful, damaging hiding success is. So far, I just showed you how hiding success is a very novel self-deprecating strategy. And even though most of the work in impression management talks about this competence warmth trade-off, the self-promotion paradox, here we also talk about the tension between relational and impression management goals. So relationship maintenance can also be a goal in real life, and it is indeed a goal. And sometimes these relational goals do not necessarily go hand in hand with impression management goals. It's also a novel type of pro-social omission, because I've shown you that hiding success stems from good intentions, people actually trying to protect you from feeling bad when they engage in this behavior. And we also see, again, that motive inferences matter a lot. Like we think about why people engage in certain behaviors, and whether when we see that there is this attempt to regulate our emotional response, we think that's very offensive. You think I'm not going to be happy for you, you think I'm going to be jealous for you, that's very offensive. This was also indeed the case for humble bragging work. Like when people humble brag, the targets do think that they're trying to hide their ulterior motive of bragging. And that's why it backfires, because it seems so insincere. One of the things, so I mentioned lots of behaviors, lots of different ideas so far in this talk. The reason why I'm so fascinated about fascinated by these behaviors, that number one, they're very common. So and they're quite universal. You may talk about this hiding success intuition with people, and as we have found in our studies, a lot of people from different stages of life have this intuition. Or right now, again, I'm wishing good luck to you, because welcome to my world of social paranoia, where from now on, you're going to start seeing lots of humble brags and things like that on your social media, because it's quite universal behavior. Maybe the term humble bragging doesn't exist in different languages, but when we talk about behaviors such as backhand compliments, name drops, people do know what we're talking about, because they're quite universal. And now with this research, we're showing that they're quite counterproductive, because they don't necessarily fulfill the goals of making a good impression. And one reason why we have this is because we have the multiple audience problem. We have conflicting goals. Sometimes it's about this relational goals versus impression management goals. But think about it in your workplace, or on your social media, on your LinkedIn, you have both your boss, but also your best friend at work, or you have your Facebook, you have your co-workers, but you also have your mom or your childhood friend, and these people are in different groups. And it's very hard to come up with one strategy that fits for all. Sometimes we have these mistakes because of intrapsychic explanations, as I explained with I told you so, because it makes us feel good to say these things. And I talked about relationship maintenance problem already. So it can be impression management. I find it to be a very important leadership skill. And of course, not what we say versus what we do not say, and can make or break relationships. Few practical advice before I wrap up and hear your questions. So you may be asking, okay, I cannot humble brag, I cannot hide my success. What should I do? Again, welcome to my world. It's a very, very balancing act. And here are some of the things that we know based on research, evidence-based research, that actually leads to a good impression. Finding an intermediary, finding a winged person on your behalf to brag is definitely a great strategy, because then people do not question the motive behind it, and it leads to some curiosity, right? If you hear something good about someone else, you're like, oh, let me Google this person. Who is this person? So I hope let's all make a pact. So from now on, anytime we hear that someone else is talking about this group, I'll say great things about the program on negotiations. I hope we have this pact. Usually we try to get both warmth and competence first, but in a short interaction, focusing on warmth is a better strategy, because competence is something that you can only signal in the long run. Whenever we take these shortcuts like humble brags or name drops, it actually backfires. In one of our recent papers, we found that the best way to signal your humility and to really look humble, you have to focus on your journey. So instead of listing the outcomes or your CV or your accomplishments, say something about how did you get there. Maybe you are a parent to toddlers, or maybe you learned, for instance, I always say I started learning English at age 15. This is more about the journey. Things like that signal humility way more than the actual outcome and the result. Do not humble brag. And also something else that I find very interesting. I know that we have lots of international audience here. I'm an international person myself, who has been in the US for 18 years now. But the first time I came here, I really did not like small talk, because it's such a social ritual here in the US. And I love deep talks, deep conversations. That's great. But recent research suggests that small talk can make you actually feel good. And right now we're looking at how small talk can also be a hierarchy reducing strategy. So if you're in the leadership positions who already established your position and status and competence, small talk can be a good hierarchy reducing thing to signal your warmth and humility. And when it comes to negotiations, some of the things that we need to think about when we combine impression management and negotiations research is that, for instance, precise offers. If you're in a negotiation and if you make a precise offer, there is research that shows that the other party, counterparty, sees you as more knowledgeable. But at the same time, precise offers creates barriers to entry for a negotiation, because the person who hasn't started negotiating with you, if they see a precise first offer, they think you would be inflexible. So something to think about. There's also this phenomenon called line crossing illusion. Many people who are seen as appropriately assertive think that they actually have been overly assertive in a negotiation, which is, I think, the reason why a lot of us, or a lot of my students now, because I've been teaching this course, at the beginning of our course always say I feel a little anxious or nervous about negotiation. If you provide a relational constraint, such as I can't pay more, versus if you criticize the product, it's not worth more, this actually saying a relational constraint leads to way better results in terms of the outcome you get in a negotiation, and also the trust that you build. And also warmth language can be harmful in distributive negotiations compared to tough language, more competence-oriented language. So I know I said lots of different things about all of these different papers. And one thing I want us to remember is also, if you're ever in doubt, do not hide your success, and share and celebrate, so we can create the culture of celebration and enthusiasm for each other's success. I've been super lucky to work with amazing scholars all around the world, and I would like to thank them. And of course, I would like to thank you for all your attention and time. And now I can hear your questions.
Wow, fascinating presentation. Thank you so much. And I'm going to give you a second to take a sip of water and a breath, because you have been doing an incredible job, and we're seeing great engagement in the chat and in the Q&A. So in these last minutes that we have, I'm going to try my best to kind of merge some of the questions that we're seeing here in the Q&A. And I'll start with asking, various people have posed versions of a question around how to know when to tailor your success story based on audience. So it's okay to say that you're an Ivy League graduate if you're right here in Cambridge, but perhaps if you're in your hometown, I don't know where, that might not be the right thing, or how, success can be tailored if you're an audience of, your own gender versus another, or a mixed group. So how do you think about that, and how should folks consider that?
Yeah, such a great question. And in fact, when I mentioned that there's this multiple audience problems, exactly what we've been thinking about in creating this research, to the way that we talk about it with our schoolmates versus with our hometown is definitely not the same. So one thing to focus there is, in emotions research, pride is a very interesting emotion because it's a very self-conscious emotion. So it's not a basic emotion, right? Like anger, happiness, we feel angry if something bad happens, we feel happy if something great happens, things like that. But pride is some very self-conscious emotion that even in developmental psychology, we know that kids do not feel pride immediately. They start feeling that a little later in their childhood. And pride is such a fascinating emotion as a self-conscious emotion. And researchers in this domain, emotion domain, talk about hubristic pride versus authentic pride. Hubristic pride is all about, I am asserting some superiority to my audience, versus authentic pride talks about the how much time it took, all the hard work you put into, the diligence you put into it. And when I combine both this research, because as observers, we like authentic pride, but we do not like hubristic pride. In fact, if you think about some people who self-promote, but they seem genuine, we usually say, oh, you go, yeah, own your self-promotion. Like with my friends, we would sometimes say, you go, girl. That's like a female power empowering messages that we give to each other. So it's not like we do not like braggarts per se. It's like how it's done is very important. So one way to do is to signal this authentic pride that you have. And another work that suggests the same strategy, I mentioned this in the talk briefly at the very end, the talking about your journey. So maybe not necessarily Ivy League graduation, but how much you had to work hard to get there, or how much you had to work hard for some of the courses you took there, or some of the things that you learned along the way, because we define journey in that paper as some sort of growth that took you from point A to point B. And if you talk about your accomplishments in this way, then everyone likes it. Both your childhood friend from your town versus your friends at the Ivy League school like that. So focusing on the authentic pride and the journey is key to talk about your accomplishments in a more both comfortable way for you, probably, which is one of the things that we're testing right now, but definitely in terms of making an impression, that's the way to do it. I know this was a long answer because I combined emotions research too, but I hope this was
Oh,
helpful.
it's great. It's really great. Thank you. We have a number of questions on, differences across both gender and culture. And I know that you could probably lead a separate hour on either of those topics. And as someone who has lived in multiple places, you have probably seen the effects. I know I worked extensively in France, and there's a very different relationship to self-promotion in that country than there is in the US. And students, writing and applying for things are not trained in the same way to self-promote as they are here in the United States. So I'm curious how, how we can approach thinking about this on these two dimensions. And I'm sure there are many others: socioeconomic status, different
Yeah.
backgrounds. So I want to, give credence to the idea that there are a panoply of things that can affect how we should be approaching these questions.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I as someone again who I think the more international we are, the more, or even right now, we all travel globally in a way. We connect with people in a global scale on a daily basis right now, thanks to technology, which definitely brings this question of like, how does it work in different parts of the world? So the self-presentation strategies definitely differ in terms of both the frequencies that they happen and also how effective they are. For humble bragging, for instance, I could only run one study in Japan. I wish I did have more studies there, but Japan is a culture that really values humility a lot. It's a collectivistic culture. Therefore, people do not feel comfortable about talking about their accomplishments, at least to a lesser extent than the US, let's say. And what we found there is that humble bragging there, for instance, again, that was just one study. I hope to run more studies and hopefully turn into a paper. But what we found in that one study was people do feel that humble bragging is more okay in those collectivistic cultures because humility is more of a norm there. So observers in that culture, for instance, don't necessarily think that you're trying to be fake and hide your motive. It's like, oh, you're doing what's expected here because we're a humble culture and you're trying to signal your humility. So where we're coming from in the culture make a lot of difference. Another difference with hiding success, for instance, if we have any guests here from maybe Mediterranean countries or Middle Eastern countries, there's something called evil eye, like as a bracelet or necklace. My mom always asks me to carry one. I love my evil eye bracelet. I'm sad that I don't have it today. I should have it today. That's one thing that people wear when they share success in those cultures. It's like it's protecting you from envy. It would be fascinating to look at there as well. So what I'm trying to say is that there's definitely a lot of cross-cultural differences. What we find in gender when we look at these behaviors is that the not only minority groups face more backlash, but it's also you're expected to brag about only certain things. So for instance, a woman bragging about her communal abilities versus a woman bragging about her leadership abilities, they're perceived in a different way. And it's very stereotypical. Women who brag about their leadership skills are punished more. One thing that we're trying to do right now is that we are running this field study in England with a consulting company where we ask leaders to brag on behalf of their team to help with the backlash that some of the marginalized groups may receive, because bragging or self-promoting is also a privilege. I don't think everyone has the equal consequences when they brag or when they self-promote or when they talk about their failures, and we're trying to, and so far that leadership intervention helps those groups. So that's another result there that I can say about this work.
That's really great. And we have a bunch of questions about leaders and, leadership and teams and bragging on behalf of your team. And I know that as a leader of what is objectively the best team at Harvard Law School, I understand how you want to celebrate a team's accomplishments. But how can we as leaders, really do that in a way that is, authentic and does not seem to cross a line? Someone had put in the chat earlier that humble bragging is the cornerstone of LinkedIn. That resonated a lot. I think we see that it is perhaps the number, other than networking, the number one tool that for which that platform is used. So, how do we navigate this in a professional setting? And I'm sure there are many ways to think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. The strategies for a leader versus, if you're trying to make a name for yourself and create your personal branding, the strategies would differ a little bit. I think one thing that leaders and organizations should recognize a lot, especially given the remote work that we have, this became even more relevant after the pandemic that we all experienced. Remember there was this pandemic a few years ago, like we all had to stay home and stuff like that. And like creating recognition rituals is very important. I think one thing that happens with the remote work, which we know from research right now, because there's some data on it, is that we focus a lot on efficiency. Like when we meet, we're like, okay, what's the agenda? What do we do here? Which is not bad, of course. We need to get things done, and that's wonderful about remote work. Gives us the flexibility, agency, and also efficiency. At the same time, recognition rituals are very important. So whether we're talking about hybrid workplace, remote workplace, or back to in-person interactions, having those recognition rituals more established and make it in a norm rather than leaving that to just water cooler interactions at work is very important. And one way to do that as a leader is that you can talk about other people's accomplishments in a way that would take away the backlash from them or the embarrassing feelings they might have. And in terms of how do we navigate this in social media, because again, if you never share anything, first of all, we already have shown that hiding things is not the best way to go. Plus, there is this very competitive attention economy right now, you got to also signal your expertise. Some strategies that work, thanking others when it comes to soft promotion works. But that also has to signal authentic pride rather than hubristic. So if you just say, I'm so grateful I got this opportunity, like, in fact, we have this, when it comes to bragging, I probably tested everything you can think of. I know what happens when you say, I'm so excited, I'm so delighted, I'm so humbled, things like that. And when people say, I'm so blessed, that actually backfires, for instance, which is a way of expressing gratitude, but people do not like it, that you think that, you're blessed with some opportunity. You have to be very specific with your thanks if you want to self-promote. I'm so grateful to work with this amazing team so that we got this award. You want to be very specific about your team. So gratitude bragging works. Saying staying away from very comparative things like we're the best, we're the greatest, things like that do not work. So again, you got to be no mention of any superiority. So staying away from comparative language and social comparisons, more focusing on your journey, your hard work, and your team. Those are some of the things. And organizationally, I would say, don't be afraid to create recognition rituals and give people the spotlight. And if you're the leader, talk about, brag on behalf of your team. This was, again, a long answer with lots of things.
I really love it. And, Övül, I'm so disappointed that we're at the end of our time, because this has been fascinating. We put your information in the chat for folks who want to continue the conversation. I know we have a lot of questions that are still unanswered. I will conclude by being what I hope is a good wingwoman for you and answering the question as to where people can see you perform your stand-up routine, which is at the Gotham Comedy Club in New York City. So I have put that on Fridays. Please check that out and make sure to celebrate her success. And I will also conclude by thanking the fabulous PON team. I'm not supposed to say that they are the best at Harvard Law School, but I'm very grateful for all their hard work and the journey we have taken together. And grateful, of course, for everyone who joined us today for this fabulous session. The recording will be up on our website in just a couple of days if you want to revisit it or share it with someone else. And we look forward to seeing everyone. We have 2 upcoming events in the month of March, as well as many more that we're in the process of scheduling, and look forward to see you here or in person in Cambridge, Massachusetts, home of, a couple of universities. So thank you very much and have a great day, everyone. Bye.